Yvonne, I guess we can start. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, as usual, we'll give 2 minutes for people to come on. So start at 10, 2 after 10 on Eastern time.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the final day of Buddhist Global Relief's Meeting the New Year with Clarity, Compassion, and Courage online retreat. My name is Patricia Brick. I'm a staff member here at BGR. We're so glad to see all of you here to practice with us today. To begin this morning, I'm very happy to introduce David Broughton, the Vice Chair of BGR, who will say a few words about our organization. David.
Namo Buddhaya. First, I want to welcome everybody. I've been overwhelmed by the number of people who have joined us these past couple of days, as well as overwhelmed by the rich teachings that we've received and the deep sense of community that I've experienced here. By way of introducing Buddhist Global Relief, I'd like to share with you a story about a trip I took a few years back to Haiti. The Buddhist Global Relief supports several programs in Haiti, which, as many of you may know, is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. People there have a daily caloric deficit of some 900 calories. Over half the households, and probably much higher now, are food insecure. 73% of children ages 6 to 24 months are anemic. 30% of children under age 5 are stunted, 19% are underweight, 10% are wasted. Only 41% of infants under 6 months are breastfed. And, into this terrible, terrible situation, of course, now we have the political unrest, this instability, and gang activity, a perfect storm for increased suffering and loss. When I visited Haiti, I had I went there to see the Father Jerry School and the Lama J food program that BGR had helped to create and sponsor. I had been to Haiti before after the overthrow of Baby Doc and when President Monaghan during his brief tenure. And I was looking forward to seeing how things changed. And I have to admit, I was terribly disappointed. As I rode in my taxi up to the T-Pos Caso neighborhood, which is on the outskirts of Port-au-Prince on a hilltop, I was struck by how every vacant piece of property had become a garbage dump. How these brightly painted buildings stood in such stark contrast to the litter that filled the streets and the downcast looks upon the people who were walking there. There was shop after shop or small cart after small cart of people trying to eke out a living. And the average income in Haiti is about $1.89 a day. And most of that goes for whatever food that they can find. As we went up the hill to where the school stood, and into the T-Pos Caso neighborhood, I saw the devastation that was still obvious from the earthquake and from all of the many hurricanes that had struck there. There were these shanties that were piled together, maybe a foot between, or in many instances they were wall to wall, covered with blue tarps. And I saw people trying to walk through them with barely enough room for a human being to pass. As I toured the school, I was fortunate to come during the mealtime, and I saw these huge vats of food, of rice and beans, and probably, I don't know how many gallons they contained, maybe 40 or 50. And there were more, there were several of these, and then there were plates already served, stacked high. And then I heard a remarkable sound. It was the sound of children as they started first at just trickling in one or two, holding hands, skipping, singing. And then it became like a flood of kids coming in through the gates, these tall walls with gates in them. And they streamed into the kitchen area or the eating area. And they sat 14 children abreast. And then those children who could not find some room there, they sat outside on some terrace-like steps. At that point, I was asked to help serve the food, which was fantastic. So we went and took plates and passed them on to the children, and who would then pass them down. And as I was doing that, I saw this little girl sitting next to what I can only imagine was her sister. She had the most beautiful luminescent smile, so bright that I almost had to avert my gaze. And when I came up to them and offered them the plates, she first of all took one and gave it to her sister, and then she took another. And then I needed to go back and get some more food, so and as I was returning, I saw that she took 2 little bites of food, and then she took the rest and she scraped it into a bowl that she had been holding in her lap. And I asked her when I came back, I said, did you get enough to eat? And she said, I'm fine. And I said, well, here's some more. And she took it and she immediately scraped that food into the bowl as well. After it was all done and most of the children had left, I was talking to another person, another volunteer there. And when I turned around, I saw this little girl and her sister standing in the doorway. And I smiled and I was going to go talk to them. But I first all had to say goodbye to person I was speaking to. And when I turned back, she was gone and the sister had disappeared. You know, I don't know if I truly believe in celestial beings and devas and deities, but I'm sure that if they exist, that day there were many there who were bathing themselves in the goodness and the compassion that Buddhist Global Relief represented, and helping to build that school and helping to feed what turned out to be almost 900 children. And when I get skeptical about my beliefs, when I start to doubt, you know, I think back to a few years after I had taken my refuges, the very first time when I had visited Buddhist Vihara here in Tampa. And I remember being brought in by a monk and asked to sit down in the shrine room and waiting for the abbot to come. And as I sat there, I had this overwhelming feeling, even in this strange place with statuary and things I've never seen before. I had this overwhelming feeling that I had come home. And I remembered that. And when I think about when my skepticism starts to take over, and I think about the good that a small handful of people can do, people with the support of folks like you, people called Buddhist Global Relief. This morning, I wish that, you know, you may be blessed with clarity and courage and compassion. May the Dhamma path rise up within you, and may you achieve our final goal, Nibbana. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, David. That was really a lovely story. Thank you for sharing it with us. Now, Aya Dhammadipa will speak to us about clarity in the Dharma, followed by a guided meditation. And then we'll end with a short period for questions. And just to keep in mind, when we do the questions today, please post your questions for Aya in chat to me, and I will read them in the order they were received to help Aya concentrate on her responses. You can see I chatted everyone recently, so you can just reply to that. Aya.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you so much, David. Yes, it's a beautiful way, a beautiful reflection to start our day today. So just a little bit of a change. I think as we did yesterday, what I'd like to do is begin with the meditation, and then we'll take just a minute for a stretch break, and then I will offer my Dhamma reflection, and then we'll have the time for a Q&A, hopefully, at the end, toward the end of the session. And the meditation that I would like to offer today, in the spirit of beginning to explore what we mean by clarity, or some ways that we might understand that word, is a meditation on the four elements. So earth, water, fire, and air. And it's one of the meditations that is understood as a way of cultivating mindfulness of the body. So go ahead and find your meditation posture. Again, sort of settling into your seat, whether that's a chair or a bench or a cushion. Feeling the weight of the body supported by your seat. Relaxing the belly. And as best you can, allowing the spine to line up, coming into an upright posture. The neck also lining up and the head resting gently on top of the spine. Allowing the muscles of the face to soften and widen and relax. The eyes gently closing. And allowing the muscles at the back of the head and the neck and the shoulders also to just soften and widen. And opening up the chest, also widening and relaxing the muscles there for this open-hearted practice. And gathering the hands together in the lap if you're feeling sleepy or wanting to gather the energy together. Or just placing them palms down on the thighs to calm the energy, to soothe any agitation. And now shifting the attention to the crown of the head. And what we're going to do is just become aware of the earth element. The earth element pervades every cell in the body. Earth element representing firmness and steadiness, stability. So starting at the crown of the head, we're not going to go in much detail, just scanning downwards, aware that there is earth element throughout the head. And then downwards also through the neck, the steadiness of earth element. Moving down the right arm, aware of earth. Down to the hand, the right hand. And shifting to the left hand. Just aware of the stability of earth element. And moving up that left arm. Until arriving at the left shoulder. Just aware of the steadiness of earth throughout the body. And now slowly moving down the torso. Steady earth element throughout the torso. Arriving down at the lower abdomen. And the hips. The stability of earth. Now moving down the right leg. Aware of earth element. All the way down to the right foot. And then moving to the top of the left leg. And scanning downward. Aware of the steadiness, the stability, the firmness of earth element. All the way down to that left foot, also pervaded by earth. And now opening the attention beyond the body to the earth element around you. Earth element as the seat, the walls, the roof. Somewhere beneath you, the ground. Just aware again of the stability, the steadiness of earth. And it's the same earth element within and without. And now coming back to the right foot, we're going to shift the focus to the water element. So if you have earth and you add water, it makes mud. So water element represents cohesion or softening, the way it sticks together. So starting with the right foot, just aware that the entire body is pervaded by the water element. The whole foot, and then moving up the right leg. Aware of the softness of water element. And when you get to the top of the right leg, you can shift down to the left foot. Aware of soft, sticky water element in the left foot and moving up the left leg. And arriving at the hips, aware of soft water element. Cohesion, softening, moving up the torso, just observing the presence of water element throughout the torso. And arriving at the right shoulder, aware of water element. And beginning to scan down the right arm. Just aware of softening of the water element. Down to the right hand. Pervaded by water. Shifting to the left hand. And gently moving the attention up the left arm. Aware of the presence of water element. And then arriving at the left shoulder. And moving up the neck. Aware of the water element. Softening. Cohesion in the body. And up through the head. Also pervaded by water element. All the way to the crown of the head. And now we shift our awareness to the fire element. Fire representing warmth of the body. Chemical processes like nerves firing. That's why we call it firing. And digestion. All of these ways in which energy is created in the body. So starting at the crown of the head, aware of the warmth of fire element. And moving downward through the head. Through the neck, aware of the warmth of fire element. Across the right shoulder and down the right arm. Aware of the fire element pervading the body. Down to the right hand. And the left hand. Pervaded by fire element. Warmth. Moving up the left arm. And arriving at the left shoulder. Then beginning to move down the torso, aware of the fire element pervading the torso. Even the heartbeat is an expression of fire element. All the way down the torso to the lower abdomen. And the hips. Every cell of the body pervaded by the fire element. Warmth. Down the right leg, observing the presence of fire. And eventually arriving at the right foot. Also, fire element in the foot. Moving back to the top of the left leg and scanning down, observing the presence of fire element. All the way down to the left foot, also pervaded by fire element, warmth. And now the last element. Oh, yes. And then observing outwardly. The water element in the air, fire element in the air. And the environment around us. Just aware that it's the same elements externally as internally. Even the sunlight is an expression of fire element. And now moving back to the body again, we're going to observe the last of the four elements, the air element. An air element represents movement, the way the breath moves the body, the way that muscles need oxygen in order to function. So beginning with the right foot, aware of the air element, the movement, the spaciousness of air, the lightness. And moving up the right leg. Aware of the lightness of air element. And then returning to the left foot, aware of the whole foot pervaded by the air element. And then moving the attention up the left leg. Aware of the lightness of air element. And then arriving at the hips and the lower abdomen. Every cell pervaded with air element. And moving slowly up the torso, where we see most clearly air element as movement. And aware that there is air throughout the torso. And then the right shoulder, pervaded by air element. And scanning all the way down the right arm. Aware of the lightness. Air element in the right hand. And air element in the left hand. Lightness, movement. And then scanning up the left arm. All the way up to the left shoulder. And the neck also pervaded by the air element. And up through the head. Every cell full of the lightness and the movement of air. And then opening the attention beyond the body, aware of the air element, most obviously in the sky, the air in the room, but also in the solid things. Air element externally is the same air element internally. Aware of the lightness and the movement of air within and without. Beautiful. So I want to go ahead and move directly into the Dhamma talk. Please feel free to adjust your posture as needed. And I can begin with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Our topic this morning is clarity. Clarity. And in a way, we could say that the whole of the Buddhist path is about clarity. About a clarity that is so profound and so penetrative and so vast that it completely shifts your perspective of the world. So whether we're talking about samatha, the mind that is uncluttered and still and focused and bright, or whether we're talking about vipassana, insight, as opposed to, you could say, for example, the hindrances that are described as being like water clouded over with algae, or water so agitated that you can't see to the bottom. So we see these kinds of descriptions throughout the Dhamma. We see it in the terminology, a lot of the terminology, right? So there's this phrase of turning upright what had been upside down, right? A phrase that refers to suddenly coming into an awareness that one's view or one's understanding was wrong, was upside down. And turning that upright, turning that to the right view, a correct, a more sound view of the world. Or there's this phrase, this beautiful phrase that the Buddha uses in Pali, yatha bhuta jnanadasana. Yeah. Means knowing, so this first part is things as they are, or the true reality. And jnanadasana means knowing and seeing. So it's this ability, these moments of truly knowing and seeing with clarity the nature of this human life, the nature of all things, actually. Or we see it in the language that the Buddha used in his first discourse, in the turning of the wheel, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, in which he says that in his experience, when he arrived at the understanding of dukkha, that there arose in him a light, a vision, a knowledge, insight, wisdom. And then he says later on that it wasn't until he had actually perfected his understanding, his experiential knowledge of the Four Noble Truths, that he could declare himself the Tathagata. And so I understand that to mean that what he's saying is that there, all along the path as this was happening, this light, this knowledge, this clarity, this wisdom was arising, this vision was arising, even before he actually became the Buddha. And he says, these things happened about things that were not known before. So there's a sense of discovery as well, of becoming clear about something that hadn't been within the scope of your experience before. And so he talks about each one of the Four Noble Truths in terms of these, in terms of three aspects, right? So the commitment to understand, the effort to understand dukkha, and then understanding dukkha, and then reflecting, this dukkha has been understood. And then the effort to abandon the cause of dukkha, right? Tanha, or what we typically translate as craving, to abandon the cause of dukkha or the causes of dukkha, and to see that has been, to actually abandon it. So making the effort to abandon it, and then abandoning it, and then reflecting, it has been abandoned, the cause of dukkha. And then again, the cessation of dukkha, right? Realize, making the effort to realize the cessation of dukkha. And then realizing it, and then reflecting, it has been realized. The cessation of dukkha has been realized. And all of this happens because of the cultivation. So making the effort to cultivate the path, and then cultivating the path, and then realizing, yes, it has been cultivated. It has arrived at its intended effect. So this is the way that the Buddha talked about how we can, each one of us can individually cultivate clarity. One of the many ways. And so there can be great leaps, and there have been actually great leaps in understanding, in clarity. But for the most part, what we see is a description of a gradual path, right? A gradual path of training. And the depths of Dhamma cannot actually be seen, I would propose, until we have cultivated some degree of clarity. So little by little, we go deeper. We become more able to see with clarity and to be open to even more clarity. But still, I would say even a small taste of clarity in any moment is a beneficial thing, and something that can be uplifting and actually address the dukkha in our lives. And I want to tell you a story that I hope is a good example of this. And I tell this story quite often, so I will just say I apologize to those of you who already heard it. But nonetheless, I think it bears repeating. And it's a story about a number of years back, and I was part of a cohort of 5 teachers, and we were doing a year-long training program at the San Francisco Zen Center, a year-long training program for lay folks, specifically for folks who didn't live in the temple. And so we started out this program, and so we would have these bigger group meetings, and then we had smaller cohorts, smaller groups within the bigger group that also met in between. And one of the first assignments that we gave people during the first month was, in the morning, or whatever time of day, I suppose, but whenever you get dressed, to pay attention to which foot you put in your clothes first, whether it's your shorts or your skirt or your dress or your sabang or your kilt or whatever thing it is that you're putting on in the morning, right? Just pay attention to which foot goes in first. The very, very basic kind of mindfulness of body training. But specifically around something that can be very habitual or kind of very out of sight because it's so mundane. And so around some point, the early part of the second month, this young lady who had been in my cohort came to me, privately, kind of took me aside and said, it's been 5 or 6 weeks and I have yet to see which foot I put in my skirt first. I just haven't been able to do it. And this was somebody who, she considered herself to be a pretty competent person. She had a responsible job. She was raising a family. She thought of herself as somebody who could do these kinds of things. And yet, all this time, she hadn't been able to do this exercise that we'd given them. Okay, so we talked a little bit about it. I talked a little bit about, being present for the moment before the moment that you're trying to see. We talked a little bit about slowing down, right? So maybe in the morning there's a big rush. She has a small child, and there's getting ready for work and so on. So thinking about slowing down or putting the clothes in a different place, like breaking up the habit a little bit, such that you could see more clearly. So we talked about various methods and modes and things that might be supportive. And then sometime shortly thereafter, she came to me, this young woman, and she said, "Guess what?" And I said, "What?" And she said, I saw. I'm able to see that I put my left foot in my skirt in the morning. Usually it's my left. And I said, "Great, congratulations." And she said, "But that's not the coolest part." And I said, "Okay, so what's the coolest part?" And she said, "The coolest part is that my daughter, she had a 3-year-old daughter, my daughter also puts her left foot in first." So suddenly, for this young woman, there opened up a new awareness of this little being that she lives with every day, that she dresses every day. There came this new awareness, and maybe a modicum, a tiny bit of less dukkha, less conflict with her, right? Because if you know that she prefers the left foot, then you hand her the left leg of the pants first, right? And even if the little girl changes what she's doing, the mom is slightly more tuned in. So it was a beautiful example and a very, very simple one. But for me, it was a beautiful example of the way in which sati, mindfulness, just created a little bit more awareness, a little bit more harmony, a little bit less dukkha. A more vivid experience of what was happening right there in her life all along. Yeah. So this is the kind of clarity. This is the kind of clarity that we all have access to, that we all can experience, right? This open receptivity of the present moment that characterizes sati, that characterizes mindfulness, can really bring a clearer and a more direct relationship with what's already present in our lives. And so part of the benefit of that is that we begin to respond also more clearly to what's present in our lives rather than our ideas about what's present in our lives, or our reactions to what's present in our lives, or our wishes for what's present in our lives. But actually, the reality of what's present is something that we're more able to observe and to respond to. And for certain, what we find will not always be pleasant. Right? It will not always be beautiful. It will not always be harmonious. One of the things that we, for example, find when we become more aware, more clear with sati, is we become more aware of the fragility of the body. Right? We become more aware of our susceptibility to illness, for example. That's why COVID is dukkha. We become more aware of how we are impacted by the environment, how this body is a product of our environment, just as we saw with that 4 elements meditation, right? So for that reason, then awareness of climate change is also dukkha. So we will often tend to see things which are also unpleasant when we become more clear. And it's important that when we do that, when we see these things, that we meet them with a compassion and with kindness. Because if we don't, then we'll just stop seeing it. We'll just stop looking. That's if we observe these things and we don't treat them with compassion, then the harshness that's there, the cutting off, or the aversion, the disagreeable feelings will make the mind tend to turn away again. You don't want to be there. So really bringing some kindness and some compassion to what we see, particularly when it's difficult or when it's painful. So sometimes it will be hard. Yet we long for an encounter with truth. We long for an encounter with reality. Another story that comes to mind that is hopefully a way of understanding this is another story from my chaplaincy days. It was very early on. I was a very new chaplain volunteer at this hospital in South San Francisco at the time. And I so you get a list and you don't know much about what's happening with that person, why they're in the hospital. You get a few indications, but you're not really sure most of the time. So part of the practice of being a chaplain is you literally arrive at the door and figure out how to offer a compassionate, a wise and compassionate response to whatever's going on there in the room with that person or those people. So I arrived at the door of this room of this Latina woman and her daughter. And I just kind of stood there at the door for a moment, just taking in what was happening. The woman who was the patient was sitting on the bed at the edge of the bed. And then her daughter was kind of squatting down in front of her. And I walked up to them And the daughter looked at me and she said, oh no, you know, my mom's okay. And we're just about to leave, actually. We're just now leaving. And it's really okay. You know, we don't want to talk. Presumably because she saw that I had on a badge that said I was a chaplain. And so I said, okay. But before I could turn to leave, actually, the woman, the patient, said, oh no, actually, I want to talk to her. She looked at me, she looked at her daughter and she said, oh no, hold on, I want to talk to her. So I said, okay, all right. So I just took a couple of steps, came a little bit closer. And then the woman said to her daughter, she said, could you excuse us? Could you excuse us for a moment? Because I would like to talk to her. And I was kind of surprised. That doesn't happen very often, that somebody would ask their family members to leave in order to talk to the chaplain, but that's what she was doing. She's asking her daughter to leave for a moment. So her daughter also looked a little bit surprised, but she, you know, did what her mom was asking and she left the room. And so I walked around to stand a little in front of this lady, and immediately she just burst out crying. She just started sobbing. And I thought, oh gosh, I haven't even said anything, and already she's sobbing and crying, and you know, crying hard enough that it was clear she wasn't going to be able to talk. So I just rubbed her back a little bit and just, you know, let her do what she needed to do. And I thought, well, at some point she'll get to the point where she could say something or wants to talk about something, because that's what she said. But then, you know, after a little while, she was okay. She stopped crying and she looked at me and she said, that's the first time that I've been able to grieve for my breast. I lost my breast. That's why I was here in the hospital. And that's the first time that I've been able to just be sad about it. And that's all I really needed, she said. That's all I needed. I don't think that I need to talk a lot about it. I just needed to be able to grieve, to be sad with it, to be sad about it in that moment. And so there wasn't a conversation that was possible or necessary right then. And so, you know, I said, okay, and told her that, you know, I was available if she changed her mind, if she wanted to talk more before she left. And she was like, no, I'm just going to get dressed and we're just going to go. And I saw her as she was leaving the hospital, and there was a lightness, she was lighter for it. I could see it wasn't her like faking a smile at that point. It was really that she felt lighter by having had that moment of meeting and expressing what was really present for her in her life. So we long for this encounter with the truth of our lives, with the reality of our lives. And that includes meeting our dukkha directly. And I want to say one other thing, which is that part of this story is about choice. It wasn't until later when I reflected on what happened there that I realized that this story was also about choice, that the woman made the choice to do that, to encounter her grief, to express her grief, to see that there was a support in the moment that would help her to do that, right? To take the privacy that she needed. All of those things. So this was very much an encounter about choice, because she could just as easily have gone with what her daughter said. She could have just as easily let it slide. Allow the moment to go by without doing that. But instead, she made that choice. So if there's one thing about which I would like all of you, I would like myself and all of you to have clarity about, it's about the nature of choice. Right? We need to understand that volition matters, that choice matters, that, as we say, we are the heirs of our actions. Because without that understanding, without being conscious of that, I would say we can't even begin to approach the right view that the Four Noble Truths represent. Because again, what the Buddha's instructions are assuming is that we know that the choices we make matter. The choices we make to practice, the choices we make about our ethics, the choices we make about being courageous enough to investigate the mind and the world around us. And this is fundamental, right? This is part of the teaching of Kamma. That whatever choices we make about what we do, about what we say, even about what we think, are engaging the process, the function of Kamma, such that there will be the resulting consequences. Right? The vipaka, or the phala, the fruit, the results or the fruit, and or depending on how you want to use the terminology, it's the same. So what we do, the choices we make matter. If we have clarity about nothing else, at least that will put us in a position to be able and willing to walk the path. Because we will be able to see that those choices that we make to be on the path are the beneficial ones, are the ones that open us up to that clarity, to that encounter with truth that we long for. So I hope that we all make the most of this opportunity. This opportunity to choose again and again to turn toward clarity, to turn toward the understanding, to choose wisely, choose to engage with the truth right there where it finds us. In the hospital or on the cushion, in your home, at the protest, wherever it finds you. Thank you. So we have just a few minutes, maybe about 10 minutes or so before we need to wrap up this session this morning. So, but we do have a little bit of time for some questions. So maybe, Patricia, we could start with one if we have any in the chat. Or folks can raise their hand if they're ready to raise their hand.
We don't have any in the chat yet.
Okay, I think somebody chatted one directly to me. So let me see there. Say a little more about the focus on the earth element. I found this difficult to connect with. My attention kept going to the connection between me and the earth, says Mike. Yeah. Well, so as I was saying a little bit during the meditation, so the elements represent these various qualities in a sense. So the earth element represents the solidity and the firmness, the stability. And so that's what you're trying to connect to when you are doing that part of the four elements meditation, for example. So connecting to the sense of solidity or firmness in the body. Oftentimes people would say, oh, like in the teeth or in the nails or in the bones is the most awesome and the most obvious places. But the real point, the greater point, and the reason why then the meditation goes to awareness of the element externally is also this, beginning to have a greater understanding that the body is not separate from the environment either. It is we are made up of these same things, and our bodies are in a constant state of interaction with our environment, right? And so the meaning, one of the meanings of the four elements meditation is for you to also experience that as well, right? Earth element externally is same earth element internally. So there is also the qualities of firmness and stability externally in the world. Okay, so Diane, you had your hand up. Diane Broughton, yeah, you can unmute yourself. There you go. Oh, there you go.
Thank you. The fire element was my question. Could it also be the chi in the body? Is chi ever talked about in Buddhism?
Is chi ever talked about? I mean,
because you can feel it in acupuncture. I mean, you can feel it when you rub your hands together. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
it's throughout the body, everywhere. It's an energy, electrical impulse. It's a thing. We all have it, whether we recognize it or not.
You know, sometimes people talk about the chakras, or the Buddha talk about the chakras and all this. I don't know, I don't think you see that in the Pali text. I'd be open to somebody else who had seen something else. But I think it's more a matter of the Buddha is his primary way of talking about our experience of the world is through our mental faculty and our bodily faculty. So is there energy being, that's happening within the body? Surely there is. And I think that the Buddha, he was said to have been somebody who was incredibly bright, right? That there was a lightness that emanated from him. And from all the awakened beings, we hear a lot about this kind of thing. So I wouldn't say yes, but I wouldn't say no. Let's leave it at that. Huh?
Thank you.
Okay. Patricia?
I have a question from Samantha.
Yes.
If there is no self, who is making the choice? Also, if everything is based on causes and effect, is there a will that makes a choice? Thank you.
Yes. So to be clear, the meaning of the teaching of non-self, according to early Buddhism, I would say it's not completely obliterating the fact of body and mind. There are still phenomena happening. And in fact, for example, so the Buddha uses the five khandhas, the teaching of the five khandhas is a very good way of showing us non-self, right? He says, all all perception is like a mirage, right? It's like a mirage. So you're driving along the road, or you're there in a desert somewhere, and you look out and you see something that looks like water, like shimmering, moving, right? Looks like water. But if you get closer, you can step closer and closer, you see that there's no water there. There's no water there. So it's not that there isn't some phenomena happening. There is a phenomena, right? There is the heat, and there is the material from which the heat is reflected upwards, and there's this movement of the air, and all of that is creating this visual as if there were water, but there isn't the water there. So it's a way of describing something being there but not actually being there. So the insubstantiality, and that's what we mean by the self. There is this sense of a self, but that is actually basically like adding something to a phenomena that's happening and seeing it and believing that there is something more to it than what there actually is. Something that's more specifically more permanent, more under our control, perhaps eternal or separate from other causes and conditions. So the teaching of non-self is also pointing to conditionality. And for that reason, then we say, oh yes, the other aspect of the khandhas that we look at is the sankhara. And the sankhara are what? Volitional thoughts, right? If you don't have the ability to make choices, to implement some kind of volition, then again, there's no way to really understand the teaching of karma at all, or the teaching that there is a possibility to emerge from dukkha, to emerge from samsara. So there is this mental capacity that we have. It's part of the, it's a very important part actually of the path. And we know that essentially that's also just an aspect of mind. Another phenomena happening that is subject to causes and conditions. It's subject to arising, it's subject to cessation. It's one of a number of things, an inconceivable number of conditions that are present in the world. Hopefully that helps. Okay, Patricia, we're going to take one more question and then we're going to take a pause so that Bhante and I can have our meal.
A question from Mary Jane. I recall a story about someone traveling in the dark and seeing a mountaintop in a bright flash of lightning. That brief vision kept the traveler going. I don't remember if that story was in a sutta. Does that sound familiar to you? Do you know if it was in a sutta?
I don't know of that story. It doesn't sound familiar to me, but I don't know. Maybe there are other folks who know of such a story in the suttas, that the flash of lightning kept somebody inspired. No? All right, well, I think the answer to that is no. I'm not familiar with it, and we don't have anybody else here who's raising their hand to say they are familiar with it. But I would say that if it keeps you on the path, on the Noble Eightfold Path, by all means. If it's wholesome and it keeps you on the Noble Eightfold Path, no problem. Stay inspired. And I think we'll end on that note. Huh? Great.
Thank you for these teachings, Aya. And thank you to all of you who've joined us for this session. We'll be back at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, noon Pacific, to hear further teachings. Please join us then. 3 p.m. Eastern Time, noon Pacific.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aya. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all, Venerable.
Thank you, Aya.
Wonderful
Thank you, Aya. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aya.
Thank you, Aya. Selamat
Welcome.
you.
Thank you, Aya.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aya.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Kiss
you.
feet. Kiss
Thank you.
feet, Aya. Kiss feet.